Sam is tackling that question because he says we're at a point now where we can understand morality at a biological level, at a neurophysiological level with tools that they didn't have 2,000 years ago, like PET scans. And he's doing all kinds of interesting stuff at UCLA where they're scanning people's brains to find out about human well-being. And that's really what it's got to come down to if you're talking about morality. It ultimately has to come down to the flourishing and the well-being of conscious creatures. Otherwise, you're talking about just nonsense. William Lane Craig says that morality comes from God. It's a command. Whatever God says is good, and we should do that, even if it includes committing genocide. I have a problem with that. I don't like that. Not only that, but it's not very objective, because at one moment God could say, commit genocide, and the other moment he could say, thou shalt not kill. So it doesn't really solve any issues. The idea of God is an idea that helps us move the ball down the field, in essence, or it did at one time. Now I think it keeps us stumbling, because we're trying to hold on to something that may have worked at one time, but it's just creating a nightmare now, as we saw on 9/11. But the real difference between the two is one of just an absolute, there is no God, and the other is saying, an agnostic says, well, I don't know, there may be, there may not. My point is, it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. I don't care if there is a God. I don't care if a God exists, neither should you, because we can't know anything about him. One guy says, in India, that God is this way, and he wants us to do this and the other. And someone else somewhere else says, no, God is this way, and he wants us to twist the head off of a turtle dove as a sacrifice to him. I mean, that's when you start getting into the stuff, when you look at what God actually said, the people who say they know something about God, and then ask yourself, is there anything transcendent in any of this? I mean, if you look at at Leviticus, you have God, who human beings have been around for 150,000 years. He finally comes down to tell us something, and what is he obsessed with? He's obsessed with the way we kill a goat or a bull, or literally, he wants you to rip the head off of a turtle dove, not cut it, not chop it. I mean, don't eat milk and meat together. It's ridiculous stuff. And it so speaks of people 35,000 years ago saying, it's their concept of God. We haven't learned anything new about God. There's nothing more we know now, we know with any degree of certainty, than some wandering Bedouin 3,500 years ago. We know nothing more about God. What we say we know more now is a reflection of what we've come to think of ourselves, and therefore reflecting it back on God now. That probably answers more than you wanted. I'll shut up. Oh, this side.
Hi, how's it going? My name's Mark. And
good, hi Mark.
Formed a atheist club back in high school a couple of years ago, and one of our discussions that we went over one day was about how to properly raise children, I guess, being an atheist. So it's kind of a two-part question. Do you have children, and how would you think is the most fair way, without indoctrinating your children, to bring them up in a logical thinking way, without explaining holidays or explaining myths? It's like almost unfair to do that to them because you're procrastinating yourself. So.
Right. Well, she had children, so I'm going to let her take over this. I heard you. I did too. My daughter, one of the reasons that I actually started thinking about this stuff on top of everything else was that I had a daughter, and I was Mormon, and I knew there were problems. Mormonism is one of those religions that is not, it's really unlike any other religion in the fact that it's the entire basis for the religion is a bunch of empirical claims about the Native Americans. If you know anything about the religion, the Book of Mormon is claimed to have been a record of the Native Americans that Joseph Smith found and translated by the gift and power of God. And it tells all these things about Native Americans, like they were a middle-aged people who had swords and chariots, and they were very, just does not line up with anything historically. And then in the early 90s, what happened was you had probably the most important thing that just shut the door on Mormonism in any way possibly being true, and that was the DNA evidence was pretty much all there. They had sampled every different people in North and South America, and none of them had Hebrew blood. That was the idea, that Hebrews came over here, and in really one of the most horrific ideas ever in the history of man, Joseph Smith claimed that the Native Americans were dark-skinned because they were bad. They were the bad group of people who came over here, and God turned their skin dark, which is just an awful, awful idea. And they also believed that about blacks, which is why they didn't allow blacks to hold the priesthood until 1978. So I started looking into it. One of the reasons I started looking into this because I didn't want to pass on bullshit to my daughter. So when I was looking in all of this, I'm sorry, that was my fear. She was 3 years old when I left Mormonism. For a while, I was still under the idea that you couldn't raise a good kid without religion. So I almost converted to Judaism. Couldn't do it because of the ethnic thing, because I grew up, I'm an Irish-German kid who knows nothing of Irish and German, and all of a sudden it's very ethnic and it just felt very foreign. And then I tried to go in with the Catholics because they have good schools. They wouldn't have me either. So, because I told them I don't believe it, but I think it's a nice, you have good hats and I like the robes. So what I did with my daughter is, to me, that first thing that I said is, atheism doesn't imply anything. It doesn't mean anything. What do I want to give my daughter in life to help her out? And one of the things that has helped me the most is critical thinking skills, is being able to rationally look at things and make decisions based on not some kind of ideas of what everybody else thinks, but what do I think about it? There was one of the other things that really started me off. I had these whole series of things. One could call it faith. I was reading a book by Robert Nozick who was talking about Socrates' line about the unexamined life not being worth living. He said that's too harsh. It's not that it's not worth living, but it's to the extent that you haven't thought through what you think about things. Your thoughts are not your thoughts. They're the thoughts that you've kind of taken on from being a kid and having all these ideas thrust on you. Unless you examine them and say, yeah, I believe that, I'm taking that with me, then you are not living life as fully as you possibly can. And when it came down to it for me, I couldn't look myself in the mirror and say, yeah, I believe in God, or yeah, I believe Joseph Smith was a prophet, and all that kind of thing. So what we focused on very much was teaching her science and teaching her critical thinking skills, teaching her, there's a great book called The Science of Democracy by Timothy Ferris, who talks about the connection between science and democracy because their values are very similar. And it's no wonder that we got what we got here in America after several hundred years of the scientific revolution, because they share so many values in common. I recommend that book to everybody, The Science of Democracy. But focusing on those ideals instead of talking about things that you don't know about, filling a kid's head with notions of sin and guilt and all of it. Yeah, follow up?
So like as far as Santa Claus or the tooth fairy or things so simple as that develop into that rational thinking.
Right.
But in your neighbors, your family, presenting those ideas to your daughter, would you automatically try to intervene? Or?
No, I would, stuff like that where they're going to learn that it's BS anyway. It's a great opportunity to say, yeah, think about God and religion the same way. It's the same kind of thing. It's stuff that people make up that, for whatever reason, it makes us feel good. I don't want to end. Nobody here wants to end, really, if you really are honest with yourself. None of us want to go into the ground and that be it. Okay? If I could live forever, I would choose to live forever with my family and friends. It's a beautiful idea. Who's going to go, oh yeah, that's awful? By the way, one of the things that's interesting about religion is that there's never any religions based on something awful. You know what I mean? No one says, oh yeah, God is this way. And nobody ever says, for instance, you take the whole evolution thing. Nobody ever says, yeah, you know what? We're not very important to God, actually. We're kind of like a cockroach in the evolutionary thing. What he's really interested in is some species that will evolve 4 billion years from now on another planet in another galaxy. And nobody ever says that. That's never we're always the center of it all. Everything was created for us. These are the tip-offs that tell you this is BS. Over.